Her son remained calm as the judge read the sentence, death by execution.
Josue Flores was murdered last Tuesday on his way home from school.
I had a nightmare the other night. It was so real. You just like to work with them. I told him that's crazy.
Officers tell us Trujillo stabbed her boyfriend with stiletto heel shoes.
The officer has been shot. We need a life flight immediately. I have the suspect in custody.
Police say the suspect may be responsible for the murders of at least 6 women whose bodies have been found in or near the Acres Homes area.
Defense attorneys had argued that Yates was legally insane and grossly psychotic when she drowned the children. One by one, they described the deaths of the alleged other 8 victims of the convicted rail car killer.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the season finale of The Evidence Room. I'm very lucky today. I am joined by the executive producer of our investigative unit, Anna Lastra. Anna has the unenviable job of managing all of our personalities, and so we thank her for coming here today.
But I also get the joy of working with y'all on projects like this.
I appreciate that. It's been an interesting journey, this evidence room. We've never really done anything quite like it, and today our final episode deals with the so-called ice pick killer, Danny Paul Bible. Neatly stored amongst the boxes of the Harris County Clerk's archives is the evidence against 66-year-old Danny Paul Bible. His was an interesting case in that he had gone to prison for murder, but what ultimately sent him to death row was the murder he had committed prior to the murder that actually sent him to prison. I know that gets kind of confusing, but what sent him to death row was the 1979 murder of Inez Deaton. She was raped, stabbed with an ice pick, and her body left near a bayou. I mean, it was awful what happened to this poor young lady, and no real rhyme or reason for it.
And where did that happen?
Here in Harris County.
Okay.
So in 1979, he's at a house in Harris County, relative's house, one of his relatives' house. Inez just stopped by to use the phone. No real reasoning behind it. He just attacked her, raped her, and killed her right there, and then dumped her by the side of a bayou. Actually, some of the accounts, it looked like she had kind of been posed like a broken mannequin was the term. And that murder went unsolved for about 20 years.
So she went over, did she know anyone at that house, or she just kind of...
An acquaintance.
Okay.
You know, an acquaintance, just stopped by to use the phone. Remember, it's 1979, that's not that unusual.
So she comes in the house and you're in the living room, dining room area. Did any conversation take place? I don't remember any conversation. You know what she came to the house for? Nothing. Okay. Tell me what happened then.
And so when she went in there, like, was the acquaintance that she knew was there?
No.
So he was the only one in the
correct,
house,
at that
and so
time.
he didn't feel like encumbered to not...
Right. He felt like he could do what he would do, and then he puts her in the trunk and cleans up the best he can, and then dumps her body.
Do you remember loading her in the car? Yes.
Oh my goodness.
And then he took off. Like shortly after her body was found and it like hit the news, he took off after that, got out of town.
So how long before she was found?
A few days.
Okay.
It wasn't very long.
Okay.
Because he dumped her by the bayou, but it wasn't like she was hidden. I mean, somebody saw her.
Okay. What bayou was it? I'm just trying to think of, people who may live in those...
Green's Bayou.
Wow.
Development's different now. There
Right.
wasn't a lot out there at the time. Now there's more.
Mm-hmm. So that's the first murder he committed in 1979.
Right, went unsolved.
Went unsolved. No one knew he did anything. And then how did he come up on the radar to end up on death row?
That's an awful, very jagged trail. In 1983, so 4 years after he kills Inez, in Palo Pinto County, which is Mineral Wells. He's driving down the road in his van, of course, because what good serial killer doesn't drive a van?
You were riding around and you saw Pam walking on the side of the road and you were driving in your van and you picked her up. Is that correct? I was coming
He attacks her, kills her, disposes of the body, goes back to her place where her roommate and her roommate's son are. And this is strange at this point because it's not really clear why, but he winds up pushing the roommate who's holding her child down the stairs.
Oh my God.
Kills them both.
What was her condition at that time? Was she saying anything? Was she moving? No, sir.
And he eventually got caught for the one murder in Palo Pinto County. He gets sentenced to prison, 25 years. But as we've talked about in previous episodes, this was under the old mandatory release laws. So he basically does 8 years of a 25-year sentence for murder and gets paroled.
But he wasn't convicted of murder in the 2 deaths of the mother and the child?
No, just one. It was very unclear in the records because now we're going back to 1983. It's a rural county. It was very difficult to try and understand what was going on at that time. But he gets the one, goes to prison, like I said, gets the 25-year sentence and gets paroled in 8 because of the old mandatory release laws that don't exist anymore. As far as the murders go, it's believed that's it. In terms, there's Inez, and then there's the 3 in one day in 1983. But none of that includes just the massive list of robberies, assaults, sexual assaults. I mean, he was accused of sexually assaulting 5 of his own relatives. And you had asked what finally put him on the radar that eventually led him to death row. Okay, so he's in Louisiana at this time, West Baton Rouge Parish, and he's staying at a Super 8 motel with his son. And he talks about one night he's drinking and playing video games, and it's kind of weird in the way he described it in his confession tape.
Sitting there watching TV and drinking and playing Nintendo with my son. Did you? What'd you drink? Crown Royal.
He had apparently had an altercation with somebody else staying at this motel, and whatever reason felt kind of bad. Went to knock on the guy's door and say, "Hey, look, sorry for the dust up." So he goes to do that. Then he drinks some more. Then he goes back, but this time when he goes back to that room, there's a woman in the room.
When the door opened, I went right on in, and when I turned, I heard this young lady, kind of like startled. Okay. Then pushed her on the bed, and I told her, please be quiet, don't, I'm not going to hurt you.
And pretty much, I guess, like he's done his whole life, he saw her and the urge hit him, and boom, he attacks her. And just, I mean, really, beats her and tries to rape her. One of the accounts was he couldn't maintain an erection, which made him even angrier.
Oh my goodness.
So he ties her up, tries to shove her in a duffel bag. She doesn't quite fit in the duffel bag, so that makes him angrier. And through the grace of God, she's finally able to escape. But this whole time, he's like telling the police, "Oh, I just told her I don't want to hurt you. Sorry, I don't want to hurt you." But yet he's tying her up. He's zip tied her and trying to shove her in a duffel bag.
After beating her and attempting to rape her.
Correct.
Do you know the purpose of why you would be trying to put her in those bags? No, sir. You wouldn't know the purpose of it? No, sir.
She, like I said, by the grace of God, gets away. He takes off into the wind. He's finally caught over in Florida for that case. They bring him in, and I guess he just decided to start talking. And so the detectives in West Baton Rouge Parish get his confession for what he did at the motel, but then he also confessed to Inez.
So if it wasn't for him assaulting that woman, her getting away, him fleeing, and then getting extradited back, and him just deciding to open up about all this, they would not have known that he killed Inez?
No. Matter of fact, when it finally came out that this guy over in West Baton Rouge Parish had confessed to the murder of Inez Deaton, and we got word of it in the media, I remember talking to Captain Don McWilliams with the sheriff's office at the time because it was a county case, And he said, yeah, we're sending detectives over there immediately because this guy is an unknown to us. I mean, they had zero clue that he had done this.
And based off of those confession tapes, which I want to dig in a little bit more on, but did he give any indication as to, you know, why he decided to come forward with it? Was he just, I don't know. I don't know if serial killers get tired of running, but
that's my guess. I mean, there was no specific, this is why I'm finally going to let loose with all this. It was just, you could tell, and even when you listen to him, I mean, it was really hard to understand him because he mumbled quite a bit in those confession tapes, and he spoke very low, and you could tell, I don't know how to put this, there were parts of those tapes where when the detectives were asking him, okay, so you did this, then what did you do? I don't know if he felt remorse or some kind of shame, but there were a lot of things where he would confess enough to confess to what he did, but then he didn't want to go into detail. Like he would say, I don't recall. Well, what did you do after that? I don't remember. Did you rape her before you killed her? Long pause. I don't recall. I mean, there were weird gaps like that, but he said enough. And I remember in the evidence room, in his box of trial exhibits, there was his written confession. I recall going into the kitchen and grabbing what I believed was an ice pick. And that was about the only time I ever saw where he expressed some type of remorse for the things that he had done.
Really?
And that was it.
Do you remember what he said?
I have remorse for what he had done. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Literally?
Yeah. No, it was, I wasn't putting that word in his mouth. He literally said, I do have some remorse for what I did. But that was really it.
I just want to circle back. So the reason he got the name the Ice Pick Killer was really just related to his first murder?
Actually, two.
Okay.
In the 1983 murders, he used an ice pick too. It was there.
Both
Now,
times?
it was interesting. They never found the murder weapon.
In the first one?
In either of the cases.
Oh, okay.
What's in the trial exhibit, the evidence box, is an ice pick, but it was used for demonstration to the jury.
So he just said, like, I used the ice pick?
Well, you could see from the autopsy reports. I mean, Inez was stabbed like 11 times.
Oh.
Yeah, and I mean, you could tell based on the wounds that, you know, he wasn't making up the ice pick part of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So all those years go by, 4 years, he would not have been caught, it seems like, had it not been for the fact that he came forward and confessed as a result of the assault on that woman.
Correct. Now, he got a life sentence in Louisiana for what he did to the woman at the motel.
Okay.
So he theoretically would be serving a life sentence in Louisiana State Prison right now.
If he had just stayed quiet
on
that.
If he had just shut up. Yeah.
Instead, he confessed, and Harris County investigators went down there to pick him up.
Yeah, they went down there to pick him up. Louisiana's like, absolutely. I mean, you've got this unsolved murder. Take him. And, you know, the way these things work, a death penalty is going to supersede another state's punishment.
Okay.
And so while, you know, it's not like Louisiana's like, no, he needs to serve his life sentence before you can take him back, you know. So clearly they're just like, no, just keep him.
And one of the other points I wanted to go back to is you referenced he had a son and that he was married.
And a daughter.
And a daughter.
Of course, I had trouble, you know, with my marriage at that particular time, and I was, you know, just disgusted and upset and drinking real heavy.
In the confession, he was talking about the night that he attacked the woman at the Super 8. He was all agitated because he hadn't been able to get a hold of his daughter, and he said, no, I'm having, you know, trouble with my marriage. I know, shock. This guy had a bad marriage. That's just completely out of the blue. But yeah, I mean, he had a son and a daughter, and at one point was married. One
of the things that, like, when you watch horror movies or serial killer shows or anything like that, because I know that's super popular, my worst fear is to kind of end up in a situation where you're being, like, attacked and, like, raped or things like that.
Oh, God.
But then I can't even imagine, like, being with a partner, you're finding out your partner is capable of committing all those horrible acts.
Right.
I don't know, did the family ever testify, or did they ever know anything?
I never saw any testimony from family members. And there were family members for victims that showed. We didn't speak to them. They chose not to speak, which I understand. The brother of Pamela Hudgens did sent a brief statement, and essentially is like, I'm happy to know that this man will now rot in hell for eternity. And that was the gist of the statement from the brother.
Wow.
Yeah.
It wasn't a straight shot to death row for him.
No, because you think about it, you have Inez murdered in 1979. He beats feet out of town after her body is found. In 1983, you have the 3 people, two women and a child, murdered in a single day. He goes to prison for one of those murders, gets out, bounces around, is accused at one point of kidnapping an 11-year-old girl, accused of sexually assaulting family members. I mean, this whole deal. And then it wasn't until 1998 that he was finally caught. So we're talking 19 years from Inez's murder and 15 years from the murder. Eight of those years he was in prison.
And that's what just boggles my mind. It's like you talked about Inez's murder, which went unsolved, the 3 people murdered, the numerous assaults, the alleged kidnapping, robberies, rapes.
You don't have to worry about alleged with this guy.
Yeah.
I mean, he's an awful human being, yeah.
So all these criminal cases against him, and how he continues to get out.
He moved around a lot, and in those days it was easier to kind of get lost. So after he gets convicted in 2003, talk about a bizarre turn of events. The prison transport van that's taking him from the county to death row gets involved in a head-on collision. That crash killed a prison guard and put Bible in a wheelchair. His attorneys have argued the injuries from that crash and a host of other medical problems should have made Bible ineligible for lethal injection. As he gets older, he develops just this galaxy of health issues, problems. He really couldn't get around much without the aid of a wheelchair. And so his attorneys argued, one, he's no longer a future threat, because you know that for a jury to give somebody the death penalty, they have to determine that if they do not get the death penalty, they would be a continuing danger and a continuing threat. So they argue, well, he can't be. He's just basically this infirmed old man now, so he's not a threat to anybody. And then the other argument was, given his health conditions, they're going to have real trouble finding a vein. And so we believe that their attempts to find a vein will, for lack of a better term, cause them to have to poke around a lot, which in our legal opinion constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. Obviously none of those arguments held up. They were all rejected. And when I witnessed his execution, I remember asking the Director of Communications for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice at the time, Jeremy Diesel, I said, did you have trouble finding? He goes, no, we did not.
Do you remember what his last words were?
He didn't have any.
Really?
He did say he could feel it burning going in, which is the second time I've heard an inmate say that. But that's not uncommon for the type of drug that goes in. There's that brief moment of a stinging sensation. And there was no, and I don't want anybody to get misunderstand this, there was no crying out in pain or anything, nothing at all like that. There was
just a remark that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, it was a remark like, oh, I can feel that. Yeah.
Who was the other one that you remember?
Shore. Anthony Allen Shore, the
was
tourniquet killer.
Okay.
And his very, very last words were, ooh wee, it really does burn. Bible's was, he remarked that he felt it burn.
Okay. What a convoluted path to that.
What an awful path of carnage this man lived. I mean, there wasn't a place that he went that he didn't cause some type of pain.
In the confession tapes, though, were there anything that stood out to you when listening to them about like what he described or what he admitted to? 2
things. One is very personal as a husband and a father, that there are people in this world that will just act on these urges. And that's what happened with Inez. That's what happened with the 2 ladies and the child in Palo Pinto County. They were there, he wanted to do it, and he did it. Same thing with the lady at the Super 8 motel in Louisiana. And that's very frightening, that you will have people walking around amongst us that just, I want that and I'm going to have it. And it's scary to think that. The other thing was, and this is purely my opinion, but he almost seemed embarrassed to admit to the detectives. It was almost like, wow, now that I'm saying this out loud, this really is awful what I've done. I mean, pure opinion on my part, but they really, and I don't want anybody to misunderstand, he wasn't coerced. Matter of fact, there's video of him being magistrated.
On 12/18/98, accused also confessed to 4 murders in Texas, 2 other rapes, and again, the Port Allen rape.
Now, he later claimed that he didn't think that would be used against him in court, but that to me was like, how can you not think that, especially since they're literally recording you?
Right.
And then when you hear people like Danny Bible or Anthony Allen Shore confess, and they talk about how it was there, I wanted it, I took it. Yeah, I mean, you realize what I try to tell people about this job that we have. It makes you paranoid. It really does make you paranoid. And it's not that we think it's going to happen, but we know what is possible.
Right.
Because we've seen what is possible.
We read the documents.
Yes.
You know.
You hear the confessions, you go to the court cases, you go deep into the cases.
You see the photos, the videos,
Oh,
you know, just thinking about all the stuff that
The
you guys have
photos
really...
that were in his exhibit.
Oh, really?
That were still the exhibits, and reading Inez's autopsy report, it's hard to wrap your head around how people do this.
Right. So that was the ice pick killer, but this has been a short season, I think, for our first one. But
it's a learning experience. We've never done anything like this
right.
before. Well, how have you? I would like to know, because I mean, you've been our leader. How have you seen this evolve from where we started to where we are now?
I mean, I think back to that day when we went to the evidence room for the first time. This was before this project was even in inception.
Yeah, the Carl Wayne Bunchen execution.
When we went for the Carl Wayne Bunchen execution, and it was just an eerie feeling, and you know, that whole room, like, as like interesting it is, like I wanted to go through every single box because I'm so fascinated by it, and like again, you will never get the answer, but I want to know like why, how. And I think that's what the intrigue is for the evidence room. And so that was kind of, I think, an overwhelming goal for us, is to not to celebrate these people. And I think we've done a good job of that.
Yeah.
But like really try and unpack the impacts that they've had on people's lives in like the city of Houston. And then just going back to it, like meeting Rhonda and being in that room with her during that time, you know, was just so fascinating to like see her in her element. You know, she was much more laid back when we first met her, like when we weren't recording for this series, but it was really interesting just to like see how organized she was, and you know, how she really had that wall up to protect herself.
You have to, in a sense.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, when you're around that much death, you have to.
And I mean, that's kind of goes into our jobs as well. You know, you have to put up those shields at times because it can impact you. As I was watching the first episode, the documentary on Rhonda and the evidence room itself, the scale of all those boxes, and realizing that, yeah, there's probably multiple boxes per case. Some of them, maybe it's just one or a file, but just knowing that how much violent crime happens.
Also, too, to me, what strikes me is the frightening nature of the everyday. And you're walking through, and things that are in there are like shovels, brooms, bed frames, stoves, all connected to these horrific acts. And so it's amazing how everyday objects can suddenly be just so frightening to see.
What do you want to do next?
William Reese. And again, it's somewhat personal for me. I have covered that man since 1997, when 12-year-old Laura Kate Smither disappeared jogging a quarter of a mile from her home and was found about 3 weeks later in a retention pond. At that time, nobody had any idea that it would literally be up until the year 2022 before her case and several others were all finally put to rest. I would like people to understand the pain and the horror that William Reese caused in the fight that Laura's parents continue to do, and the good that came from these horrible things, because they were not going to let their children die for nothing, for no reason. So
So stay tuned for season 2, because I feel like that's a powerful story. There are obviously a lot of powerful stories.
The killing fields. We had talked about the killing fields.
Yeah.
Most people do not realize that Texas the entire reason the Texas Equisearch exists was because Tim Miller's daughter is one of the victims of the killing fields.
And so I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of stories out there that need to be told, I think, on a more micro level. And, I'm really proud of this team for working on this project and being so successful with it, but also, like, handling it with care. I'm interested to see where we go next with it. And I think Evidence Room Season 2 will be coming soon.
If you have a case you want us to see, let us know. Seriously, we've gotten a few that have come in. If there's a case you want us to know or do you feel deserves to be highlighted, please let us know. You can reach us via email, via the website, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, any of the ways that we are pushing this out.
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of great comments, actually, with some of them. So those are definitely, for those of you who commented, they are on the list for sure.
We'd really like to thank everybody for coming on this journey with us. This has been new for us. We've had 6 episodes of the Evidence Room. If you haven't had a chance to see them all, you can find them on YouTube, on click2houston.com, or on our streaming device, KPRC2+. And as our executive producer, Anna Lostris, said, after the first of the year, we will have season 2 coming. So stay tuned. And again, thank you.